Hello everybody, welcome along to this video. Another one trying to talk you through unseen poetry. This is the second one of these I've done, so if this is the first one you're watching, maybe check out the other one first. I'm going to be following the same pattern that I taught in that one, which is a structure to follow in order to best approach writing about an unseen poetry as you're expected to do in your GCSE exam. Worth 24 marks, that one. So it is big, it's nearly as big as the poetry you've studied, and then you have to compare it to a second unseen poem for 8 marks. So we're not doing the comparison today, we're just going to work through the structure of how to write about and talk about an unseen poetry, or unseen poem. So let's move on. So step 1 is, as it says in the box there, reading the poem, highlighting anything that leaps out at you. Now ideally what you'd need to do here is pause this video because as you haven't seen this video before, you're going to want to read it. If it's possible to Google the title, which you can see is Blessing and the poet is Imtiaz Darka. If you could Google that, get a copy, print it off or copy it out and actually do this physically, you're in a much better position. If nothing else, what you're going to do in a second is pause the video and decide as you're reading it which bits leap out at you, is the expression I always use when I'm teaching. Which bits are the instant bits that sort of stand out to you for any reason. It doesn't matter what that reason is, but make sure something jumps out at you, and there should be bits. See if there's any methods that you notice coming through as well. It could be similes, personification, listing, whatever it might be. Those are absolutely things which should leap out as well. But before you get started and before you go ahead and pause the video, let's just read that question before you read the poem, because then, of course, you know what you're looking for. So the question is in the bottom left of the screen there. In Blessing, how does the poet present the people's feelings about water and its importance? Key trigger words there for you. How does the poet do it? How being a word which basically translates into what methods does the poet use? And then the focus, the steer of the question, water and its importance. People's feelings about water and the importance of it for 24 marks. So pause the video now, read through that poem by yourself, and then as soon as you're ready, unpause the video and we'll get going again. Okay, on the next slide, what I'm going to show you are the things that leapt out to me. So see if this compares with what you thought. It doesn't mean you're right or it doesn't mean you're wrong necessarily. These are just my personal choices of what's leapt out at me. Let's see if they match yours. And you can see it there. Just quickly, some of the things I chose. Skin cracks like a pod at the instant start of it. Well, what you've got there is the simile, but also it's really vivid imagery as well. Skin cracking, there's something very uncomfortable about that. The fact that there is never enough water. Things that leap out which I couldn't highlight. The fact it is in stanzas, but these stanzas aren't equal. You might notice I've highlighted certain sounds as well. There's a lot of sibilance I notice in this poem as well. That repeated S sound that comes through in more than one place. And at the very end of the poem, Blessings, there's a repetition of the title of the poem there down at the bottom, and we've also got the small bones. Again, really vivid imagery. Bones conjures up this imagery of death and dying and decay, but the fact that you've got small bones singing over their small bones, there's just something that doesn't feel right about that. But there you go, step 1 done. Step 1, when you're in the exam, you've read the question, highlighter in your hand, go through, pick out anything that leaps out at you. Second step. Look at the title. Think about its connotations. Blessing. When you think of blessing, it should have those positive connotations. It's very religious. It's used certainly in Christianity. The idea of putting a blessing on somebody is almost a sort of a good mark. Something, as I said before, which is very positive. To be a blessing is when something helps you in some way as well. So if we think about the fact that this is an incident, something's gone on with water in this poem. Hopefully you picked that up when you were reading it. And we've actually got a pipe bursting in that third stanza. And then it's almost acting like a blessing, suggesting that this is a place which doesn't get much water. Therefore, that title is really key. The fact it's repeated into the second to last line also seems really important as well. So that's step 2. And what you would want to do there is actually label the title. So don't just look at it and think of these things because they will be gone. Actually label it. And also, as I've put on my question there, can you work out the message of the poem? What do you find out by reading this poem? And it really can be as straightforward as in this poem. It shows how important water is to these people, suggesting that this is a place which doesn't get enough water and shows how grateful they are for water. What I've just described to you there may sound straightforward, but that would absolutely gain me marks in the exam because it shows I've understood the idea in this poem. Step 3. Let's choose 3 things. Now, I'm not going to actually physically do this while we're doing the video, but I would like you to pause, label them onto the poem. This is then your plan, and then when you start writing your answer, all you've got to do is look up at your highlighted poem, look at the things you've just written, those methods, and you're away. You're writing about those methods. Personally, I would look at the simile in line 1. I'd maybe pick out the sibilants on that 3rd stanza, particularly towards the beginning. There are other words I could pick out there as well. And finally, for me, something towards the end of that poem. Those 2 bits I've highlighted at the end would work for me. I would talk about the sort of, I call that dark imagery, or maybe even sinister imagery, or unsettling would probably be the best word I could choose there for that one there. So therefore, I've got my simile, I've got my sibilants, and I've got my unsettling imagery. I've got 3 methods. I'm away. That probably will be all I have time to write about in the exam. That's step 3 done. Step 4, constructing your answer, which is something we're going to do together in a second. The PEAR structure being the one we use in my classroom and the one that we follow. So we're going to follow that for this video. Should you be somebody somewhere else watching this who uses a different structure, then go with it. Chances are the structure you've been given and the PEAR we're about to use have pretty much got the same methods within them. So let's move on. I'm going to do this with you. Now, what I would like you to do, please, is have your pen and paper ready. If you haven't got it ready, pause this video now and grab some. Because what you want to do is listen to my thought process as I talk you through how I'm writing. I haven't got anything written down here. I really am doing this as live, as you say. So I haven't got a plan as such. And then what I'll do is I'll throw over to you with a couple of ideas that you could then write about, and that's your practice done. Revision, which is what this is, absolutely always should be active. So don't just sit there gazing off into the distance or playing with your phone while listening to this video. Make sure that you're actually doing this with me. So let's have a little go at that then. So live writing an answer. Well, the first thing I want to do is I'm looking down here at the question. In Blessing, how does the poet present the people's feelings about water and its importance? So people's feelings, I'm going to write, my first line is going to be all about that. I'm going to even use the poet's name to get my answer started. So Darker illustrates to us, rather than use the word shows, illustrates to us how important water is to these people. I'm going to say it in a slightly different way, and how grateful they are as when the pipe bursts. I've now shown that I've understood what's actually happened in the poem when I say that. As when the pipe bursts, I'm going to use the word frantically, which is taken from the poem. They frantically gather the water. Now what I've done there is I've sort of shown the main message of that poem. What I'm going to do next is I'm going to pick out a method. So this is my part of my P step, the point. So the method I'm going to go for is the simile. One way that she illustrates its importance, just showing again that I really understand it, its importance is by using a simile in the first stanza. Now what I'm going to try and do next is I'm moving on to my evidence. I'm going to drop in some evidence and I'm going to try and embed that quote as I go. So the skin cracks like a pod is the line I'm going to go for. I'm going to go for she writes that the, and then I'm going to quote, skin cracks like a pod. I haven't quoted anything there I don't intend to use. The skin cracks like a pod before revealing that there is never enough water. In fact, I could put all of that in their quotes as it's all part of the same line. Never enough water. And now that's it. That's the evidence step quite simply done. I've actually got 2 quotes. I'm going to really focus my energy on the first quote because that simile is the method I've picked out. So now I need to look at it. This is a step I know a lot of students maybe struggle with, is how to analyse. And that is my next step. So what I'm doing right now is I'm looking at those words, skin cracks like a pod. So like is what makes it a simile. I'm not going to focus on that. A pod, maybe. If you had something to say about that, you could. But really, I'm going to focus on those first 2 words because put together, they don't feel right. Skin cracks. When your skin cracks, sometimes it's because it's too dry. You might get that in the winter sometimes. Cracks is a very sort of aggressive sounding word as well. It's got some very hard sounds to it. So that's my thought process. Now I'm going to try and put that into words. By using the, now what is it? What type of word? Skin cracks. I think that's a verb in that sentence, but I'm going to pretend that I don't know. And if you didn't know if it's an adjective, a verb, etc., then use the word word, because you get just as many marks for it rather than guessing and get it wrong. By using the word cracks, I'm going to use her surname again because I don't want to keep calling her her or she. Darker, now I need to decide what it does. Darker, almost, I'm going to use the word suggests. Suggests that this is a desperate place. As cracks, as this word, I've already said the word cracks, as this word has negative connotations. If you never know what to say about a word, just decide if it's positive or negative and say why. As this word has negative connotations because it, and here comes why, it makes us, rather than me, makes us think of pain and also droughts when land cracks up without enough water. Because the skin is cracking, I'm going to quote the word skin, the skin is cracking, it makes us feel, I'm going to say uncomfortable, I'm going to use that word I used earlier as well, and unsettled. As these words together create an unusual image, I'm almost saying imagery there, which is another method, but an unusual image in our heads. Now I've actually nearly reached the end of that first paragraph there. I've got my point, which includes a method, I've got my evidence, and I've now actually started to unpick a word. If I had a little bit more time on this video, I'd probably then talk about a pod and why a pod cracks like a pod. Pod's something which contains peas inside of it. It's almost something which looks hard on the outside and inside has got something really positive. So maybe suggesting like the water is releasing something from them is my interpretation of that. Haven't quite got time to do that on the video, but absolutely would encourage you, particularly if you're going for those highest marks, and why wouldn't you be? If you're going for those highest marks, try and add in an also or additionally onto your answer there. However, what I'm going to do with the time I've got left is I'm going to quickly talk about the message of the poem again, so bringing it back down to the reader. Darker, I could spell the name there. Darker reveals, I've misspelled the name, haven't I? Darker reveals to the reader just how desperate, I think is the meaning of the poem here. Desperate, the people in this poem are, and how grateful they will be. I know I've done a typo there. And how grateful they will be for the burst pipe, which might relieve, like prevent, might help, might relieve their need for water. Now, it's not a perfect ending, but certainly what it does show in the time I had there, it does sort of show another understanding of the poem, which is, I'm going to try and link it back to my method there, because I did talk about the method, which is created, all typing going wrong here, which is created by the simile in the first line. And there you go. What you've got there is a really decent PEAR paragraph, which would certainly gain you a lot of marks. A lot of times students will say, what grade is that? Teachers, we really shouldn't be talking about grades for a paragraph. You get a grade for your entire literature GCSE, which is made up of 2 papers, which is made up of at least 6 questions. There's no such thing as a grade for that. We can talk in levels. Literature answers are split into 6 levels. And certainly what I've got there is at least solidly level 4. I'd like to think that as I continued, it might even move on to a level 5, particularly if I'd done that extra interpretation. If I could then talk about something deeper with that, a sort of a deeper message beyond just that they are grateful for water, that's probably how I'd push it into a grade 6. I've got about 20 seconds left, so I'm going to throw over to you and say the next stage is continue that answer. If you're not sure what to look at, maybe consider the S sounds, almost mimicking the rush of water, that sibilance, trying to conjure up that imagery of water for us. Or maybe like you've got the words like frantic and screaming, which are almost quite negative in their connotations, and what mode that sets. Either way, I wish you the very best of luck with this, and thanks for listening. Bye bye.